What's up, guys? This is TheKephas. Welcome back, everybody, to WoW Leveling Wednesdays. This is episode 2, and I'm going to be transparent here and let everybody know that I am recording the audio portion of this episode separately, and that's because I goofed up, and when I recorded this episode, the audio portion did not get picked up. So we've got our video here, and we are recording the audio again. My bad, but it's not a big deal. The goal in this episode is going to be to get our shaman, his garrison, get our garrison Hearthstone, and then move on back to Chromie and Ogremar, switch things over to Cataclysm, and do some old world leveling because I like the old world leveling zones. So that's the plan. And in the meantime, I do have a topic that I want to discuss with you guys related to World of Warcraft, and I want to broach this subject carefully because basically, I want to talk about, min-maxing, optimization, meta chasing, and how that can impact the game. And I want to broach this conversation as carefully as I can and give my thoughts on it in hopes that, you will reply in the comments and give your opinions on the topic. It's just a harmless conversation. And recently I made a video about this, actually, where I talked about why I don't min-max or chase the meta, and I deliberately kept that video very introspective, very focused on myself, my own personal experience, and the reason why I did that is because I didn't want to come across like I was telling other people how they should play the game. That's not my intention or my interest at all. I don't want to do that, and I don't want to do that here either, so I want to try to broach this conversation as carefully as I can, though there's always a chance that I might upset somebody because I might say something that they don't agree with or infer about them in a way in terms of their approach to the game. And again, I don't want to do that, but I guess I want to try to be as objective as I can about this because honestly, I don't really think that there is a wrong way to play World of Warcraft. Whether you play the game casually or you are playing the game as a hardcore player doing the highest end content and min-maxing and using everything that you can to achieve the highest level of content, I think that's fine. I don't see anything wrong with that. The only wrong way to play the game, in my opinion, is if you're cheating or if you're doing some sort of RMT nonsense. I mean, that stuff's not great. So that's my own personal opinion there. But aside from that, I think it's great to play the game how you want to. And I think that the best way to avoid friction is to find people that are, especially when you're doing group content, find people that are of like-minded nature, think the way that you do about the game, and play with them. I don't think that it's great for a casual player to play with a hardcore player because I think that they have two different views of the game and they want different things from the game and they're likely to clash. So ideally, you will find people that play the game the way that you do and have a good time. And I think that different people will have different definitions of fun when it comes to the game overall. But I guess I still have to wonder if there are times when this general hyper-focus on optimization and min-max culture, as people like to call it, everything is a culture nowadays, or this meta chasing stuff, I do think that there are times where it can have a negative impact on the game. And in a way with WoW that I don't see with a lot of other games. I mean, there are I think a lot of online games have this problem. People who play in online, games or repetitive games or group games will be more inclined to optimize because, especially when you're doing a lot of repetitive, grindy content, you just want to get through it. Even if you have fun, there are diminishing returns on repetitive content. At some point, you're probably going to start thinking, gee, what is the fastest way that I can get through this, right? I think that is a natural thing that people will do. But are there times where that can manifest in a negative way? Are there times where that can bring out toxicity? And I guess a good example that I've seen recently And again, like, I don't have a lot of anecdotal evidence here. Personally, I am a little bit more nervous to do group content in WoW than I am in, like, say, Final Fantasy. But I will be upfront and say that has a lot more to do with my impression of how WoW players tend to be. So, you know, for me, it's like, you know, I don't have a lot of time to play. And when I play games, I just want to have fun. I don't want to deal with people's nonsense. It's not so much about, like, you know, people insulting me and getting offended or whatever. It's more just like, I don't know, I just want to have fun. I don't want to deal with people's crap, you know. But, so feel free to let me know in the comments if, like, the impression that I have is not as bad as the game actually is, or whatever. But, you know, I've seen a lot of people talk about when Dragonflight launched, there were people that were, you know, getting into dungeons on day one, and they were getting kicked from the new dungeons on day one for not knowing the fights in those dungeons on day one. And even within the first week, you know, there were a lot of people saying, man, you know, people are crazy. Get into this new dungeon, and I got kicked because I didn't know how to beat the first boss. I didn't know the strategy. Or I wasn't pulling, I was a tank and I wasn't pulling wall to wall, you know, or whatever. That's an example of where people will have this weird expectation, like, I want to get through this as quickly as possible. Everything is about speed and efficiency, to the point where a lot of people, I guess, will, you know, before they ever step foot in the dungeon, they'll look up a guide on how to get through it, I guess. And I mean, the game does have like a journal, a dungeon journal, that will give you some information about a boss. But even with that, like, there's still like a lot of information you can get online, and I guess people are just expected to look that stuff up. And you know, I don't know. I personally don't approach games that way. I mean, it's not that I don't look up guides. I mean, I will if I'm having a hard time. But like when I played Elden Ring, for example, I just played the game for a while and got through, discovered, you know, dungeons on my own, beat the bosses on my own, used whatever I found, and just kind of played. Eventually, I would look up a guide if I was like, okay, how do I put this together in a way that actually feels good? You know, like that kind of stuff. Because, like, you know, in that game, you know, it's really hard. You know, or in my experience, like, you know, I'm visually impaired, so finding some of the dungeons was a little bit difficult. You know, when I played Breath of the Wild, there were 120 shrines to do. I never looked up a guide on how to beat any of them. I figured them all out on my own, but there were times where I couldn't find one. I'd be looking around for like half an hour, and it's beeping at me, and I know it's around here. I just can't seem to find it. So there were times where I would look up a guide on how to find it, you know. So, and there are times in WoW where I'm like, okay, I don't know how to do this quest. I'm going to look it up on Wowhead, you know, stuff like that. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with using guides. I just think that, like, there's a degree where it's like, man, you're expected to know how to beat a dungeon on day one when it's released. That's a little bit crazy. And I don't know, again, that may not even be all that common, but it happened, you know, enough that there were people talking about it. So I guess it happened, but I just don't know to what degree stuff like that happens. But I guess that would be an example of where, you know, people, when they play this game, like, and they have this mentality of like efficiency, where it can kind of have a negative impact on other people's experience. And I do think there are times as well where having that mentality can have a negative impact on the person who has the mentality. It can have a negative impact on their own experience. Again, that's where I want to be careful, because, like, man, I do not want to come across like I'm telling people how to play the game. I don't want to do that. I do think that there are a lot of people that when they play WoW, it feels more like a job than a game. And that usually happens when people are relying more on extrinsic motivation than intrinsic motivation. You know, where intrinsic motivation usually means I'm having fun with the game. I'm actually enjoying what I'm doing. Whereas an extrinsic motivation is going after some kind of reward. Whether it's clearing the content, getting the higher level gear, or whatever it is. It's like, I'm not really enjoying what I'm doing. I'm just here to get the reward. Which is how a lot of people view their job, right? If that's how you view WoW, chances are it's probably not that great of an experience for you. And the idea when you're playing a video game is hopefully there is some level of intrinsic value or intrinsic motivation for you. You know, so a lot of times I think that optimization comes as a result of lack of intrinsic motivation. so more than just like, ooh, you know, this is fun. I do think that for some people it is fun to number crunch and, you know, be as optimal as possible and do the most damage or whatever, get through it faster. You know, people do speed runs and they do so many crazy things in games with speed runs that it's fun. You know, it's like, ooh, look how fast I got through this. I mean, I remember when I was playing Punch-Out, there was a time where I could beat like the first 3 guys in Super Punch-Out just by listening. I knew how to do it in a way where I could just listen to what was happening. I knew the sequence, and I could beat those guys very fast without even looking at the screen. I felt really cool about that, you know. So there are times where, you know, like just playing the game on on a certain level can be enjoyable, can be satisfying, and WoW's no different there. But on the same time, you know, there are times where I do feel like there are people that, like, man, you know, like they want to have fun, they want to enjoy it, they're doing the best they can, and then there are times where it's just like, man, maybe it's not as fun as they want to think it is. I don't know, but I don't want to infer that because I don't want to like psychoanalyze people. Hopefully, you guys listening know where I'm trying to come from when I talk about this, I guess. You know, but I think that there are times where, you know, where it can definitely have a negative impact on the game. I recently watched a video from Folding Ideas. It was titled "Why It's Rude to Suck at WoW," and it talked about a lot of the things that people do to min-max and a lot of the pressure that was put on other people to keep up and you know, whatever. And it was very interesting. Like, it's a very interesting discussion. A lot of people had a lot of input on it, and what I thought was most interesting was actually at the very beginning of the video, there was a quote made, and it was a quote from an article about WoW from like 2010. And it said, "I will describe a community that took a virtual world and turned it back into a database." And I thought that was really interesting because that does kind of feel like what it's like sometimes when you're playing World of Warcraft, you know, and you're out here just playing the game. You know, you're out here just having fun. You're not taking anything that seriously. And you come across somebody who's just very elitist minded, you know, and you've got people crunching numbers and, well, that build you're using sucks. It's not optimal. Or, you know, why are you playing the game that way? Or why, you know, like whatever. It's like, because I don't care. It's just a game. I'm just having fun. Wow, you make the game worse. I mean, I remember back when, it doesn't happen much now, but back when I used to make macros, back in like Mists of Pandaria and even in Warlords, especially back when I first started doing it, I got met with a lot of hate from people. Like there was a lot of hate. I mean, there was obviously more like love than hate, because otherwise the videos would have never taken off and I wouldn't have kept doing it. But I still would get a lot of resistance from people like, you're making the game worse, people aren't gonna use this crap, and then they're gonna get into my groups, and then my groups are gonna suck because people are using your macros. And I'm like, look, I'm not big enough to do that, have that much of a negative impact on the game, first of all. But second of all, like, people that use macros like mine, you know, they're not out here trying to min-max and do the highest level of content. They're just playing the game casually. And you know, my mentality, a lot of people's mentality is do as much as possible no matter what the content requires. That way you get through it faster or whatever. Whereas my mentality is more like, I'm just here having fun. If I can get by doing at least as much as required of me to get through the content, then I'm happy. Like, so if using a macro, I do, say, 10k DPS. And let's say I would do 12k DPS if I wasn't using the macro. But the dungeon only requires that I do 8k DPS. Well, then I'm good. I'm golden. I'm chill and I'm relaxed and I'm having a good time. Other people would say I'm holding the group back. Even though I'm doing more damage than is necessary, I'm still holding the group back, because if I did it this other way, then I would do even more damage. You know what I mean? Or like, let's say I take the macros out of the equation. Like, let's say you're a hunter with a new talent tree. And let's say you don't like, this is me, I don't like Serpent Sting. Well, Serpent Sting's meta. If you do Serpent Sting, you do 11k DPS instead of 10k DPS. And you're like, well, I'm okay doing 10k DPS because I don't like Serpent Sting. You know, that's my mentality. Especially, like, if I don't need, like, yeah, well, then we're going to get through the dungeon a minute slower than we would if you would use Serpent Sting. It's like, yeah, but I'm enjoying 11 minutes instead of hating 10 minutes. You know what I mean? Like, that's my mentality. That's the mentality that I have when I play the game. Whereas other people are like, no, whatever the min-max is, whatever the optimal thing is, that's what you do. And if you don't, then screw you, get out of my group or whatever. And that can be a problem. It's not a problem so much if you're forming your own groups, but when you're doing like random groups and that's how you think, and you're kicking people from day one dungeons because they don't know the content, I think that's a good example of when people need to chill on this optimization stuff and relax and just tether their expectations when you're doing public open grouping. You know, like my view of LFG in WoW, you know, the random dungeon finder, as you know, you kind of give up your right to be selective when you use LFG in order to expedite the process of getting a group. So when you go into a LFG dungeon for a leveling dungeon or a starter dungeon or a new dungeon, and you have all these expectations of your teammates, I think that's a problem with you. And it's especially a problem if you abuse the vote to kick tool for them not meeting those expectations. Like, to me, it's like, if the person's participating and we're getting through it, then it's fine. If it takes us 25 minutes to clear the dungeon instead of like 15, then whatever. Then we get through it a little bit slower and then we move on to the next one, and the next one might be way faster. You know, I'd rather a new tank have the experience. You know, if you get into a dungeon and you got a new tank and they're like, okay, my first dungeon here, kick them. They don't know what they're doing. Like, what? Like, that's crazy. Because they're not going to pull wall to wall. They're not going to pull every group in the dungeon. Or the healer gets kicked because he can't keep up with the tank who's doing that or whatever. And that's been a problem with WoW for a long time, man. Like, that's been around for a while. But it's just a shame that that's something that doesn't get addressed. Because in my mind, people who abuse the vote to kick tool should get a ban. A temporary ban from the game for doing that. Because I think it's wrong. I think it's unfair. And, you know, people say, well, if you're new, maybe you should form your own groups. And I'm like, I think the opposite's true. If you have expectations and you want people to meet your expectations, you need to be the one to form the group, not people out here just doing dungeons because, hey, I got a quest and I want to complete this dungeon to do this quest. Or, hey, I'm leveling and I want to learn how to do this stuff. This is how you do it, is through the LFG tool. And this was a problem I never saw in Final Fantasy. I really never saw people talk about it. So again, I never experienced it, but you know, maybe I wouldn't experience it that much in WoW either. I don't know. And that's where I'd love to hear people talk about it, because I'm curious. You know, that's what I talk about. Like, when I talk about optimization, you know, I'm not talking about people who are like, man, you know, we're doing this raid. Make sure that you have your enchants, your gems slotted, you know, you bring food, you bring your flasks, that kind of stuff. Make sure you bring that stuff. That's what some people think of when they think of optimization. To me, that's using what the game gives you to play the game. To me, optimization is more like playing as if you're doing the highest level of content when you're just doing basic content or normal. Like, if you're doing a normal raid and you're like expecting people to do the normal raid as if they're doing mythics, and you're out here like, we're a semi-core raiding team, or we're a casually hardcore raiding team, because you want to be both, right? Like, you're like, oh, that, you know, then you can kind of impose whatever you want depending on what suits you as the raid leader. You know what I mean? Like, that's the kind of stuff where it gets kind of murky and a little bit weird. You know, it's like, well, you know, you need to be out here doing all these dailies and weeklies so that you can get this, you know, item that'll give you like a 0.5% increase in performance for the raid. So you got to spend multiple hours doing this crap that you don't even want to do just for a minute increase in performance. You know, stuff like that. Like, that's the kind of stuff that gets me. You know what I mean? Like, so there's definitely a difference between like people out here like, ooh, I'm actually doing like mythic plus 15s or whatever, which be honest, I've never run a mythic dungeon in my life because I don't know. Like, that expectation stuff, man, it's just like, I don't know. It just doesn't, like, I just don't want to play the game that way personally. That's just me, though. But at the same time, when I'm doing like a normal dungeon and you got someone in the group acting as if we're doing a mythic plus 15, it's like, bro, we're doing fine. Relax. It's all good. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, man. People are weird, I think, and it's weird. Like, I just don't experience it with a lot of other games, especially like the whole like coming pre-equipped with knowledge before you even do the content. Like, that's especially weird to me because that's not something I do with other games, And like, I'm not gonna like shame people for using guides. I mean, I make guides. There's nothing wrong with using guides, but there is a lot. Like, there's like, what can I say? I'm gonna use a straw man argument. And I don't like, I mean, obviously, strawman arguments are fallacies. Like, they're not great arguments, but it's more to highlight different things that people do when they approach the game. Okay, so that's kind of the idea. So, like, let's say somebody's like, all right, I'm going to level up a character in WoW. And they use, like, Zygor guides or, like, Rested XP or Azeroth Autopilot or something like that because they saw it advertised on some video where they were looking up the fastest way to level up their character, right? So they're like, all right, I'm going to level up this new character. They follow some guide to the T. They never read quest text. They never explore. They just rush to the end. And then they get the max level. And they're like, all right, I need the right talent build. So they look up the most popular talent build on Wowhead. And they just copy paste it into the game. Cool, I got my talent build. Now let me look up the rotation. So they set their their action bars up, to do the rotation that they look up online that tells them how to do the rotation, right? So they've got that, and so now it's like, all right, now I'm ready to do the dungeons. So they go into the dungeon. Oh, wait, before I go in, let me look up the boss fights. So they go into the dungeon with all the knowledge they need to get through the dungeon, and like, oh, you do it like this, stupid. How do you not know this? Before the first time they've ever been in the dungeon. Why didn't you look it up beforehand, And so they get through the dungeon because they looked up the guides and they knew how to do everything, and they do the same thing with the raids, and then they clear all the content, and then they're done in 2 weeks, and they're like, I'm bored. I don't have anything else to do. Blizzard needs to add more content. They need to keep up with my pace. And I don't know if that's something that happens in retail much, but it certainly happened in Classic. Classic Wrath, like when the game was easier, the content's already been figured out, everything's known, people have been playing on Classic private servers, and there's all this data, like all this knowledge out there, and people did all this stuff. A lot of min-maxing. It was a big problem in Classic. A lot of complaints. You can watch a lot of Willy videos about it. Actually, I think he has a lot of interesting opinions about this, but it definitely feels like it had a negative impact on Classic a lot. And in Classic Wrath, even, there were a lot of people that within a couple of weeks were saying that stuff. Like, I'm bored. I got through the content, and it's like, yeah, you looked up all those guides and you did the optimal, you used the optimal class and build and did everything, followed all these guides and got through it, and, now you're bored. It's like, well, I mean, it's not wrong to look up the guides, I guess, but I think you should know what the end result of that's going to be. If you play a single player game and you're like, all right, here's the IGN guide. I want to use this as I go. And then you get through, like, man, that was easy. I wasn't surprised by anything. There were, like, I knew everything from the beginning, and I don't know why it was so easy. You know what I mean? It's like, well, you looked up a guide there, genius. That's what happens when you use guides. That's what happens when you blow through the content using the knowledge that other people had who spent time getting through the content and figuring everything out for you to then use and then fly through it. That's an example of where people are so optimization focused that they don't see how that can sometimes sabotage their own experience. And I think that's an example of like where I see people doing it, whether they want to admit it or not. Well, I don't enjoy leveling. I've done it too many times. Or, well, I don't enjoy building a talent tree out myself. Or, well, I don't like figuring out the rotation. Someone else already did it, so why should I play the game worse? That's how a lot of people think. It's like, well, because it's fun to figure it out. That's supposed to be part of the process, is figuring it out. But that's not how people think these days. And so a video game becomes a database. It becomes number crunching. And it's like, well, no one ever gets into a video game because they listen to somebody crunching numbers and talk about the meta. No one gets into a game because of that. They get into a game because, ooh, this is a big open world and there are a bunch of other people out here and I can be a dwarf. that sounds cool. You know what I mean? Like that's what people get into these games because of. It's like it's a video game. It's like a lot of people don't get into it it's like some people look at WoW like the Matrix, like where the people who were unplugged look at the Matrix. They see all the green code, right? It's how some people look at WoW. It's like it's a bunch of numbers. That's fine if that's how you look at it and that's how you want to approach it, but don't get mad when there are other people that look at it and then they see a virtual world and they're like, look at my character and look at this cool gear that I have, and ooh, I'm really into this, and like, ooh, I like this zone, and like, I just like, I had like there were times like where like when I would do dungeons with my friends, like we didn't look up, and we agreed we're not going to look up anything. We're going to go into this and we're going to figure it out. Those were the most fun times I ever had because I figured it out on my own. And I'm not blaming people who don't want to do that. It's not your fault, but just know that that's like the design of the game is for you to do it that way. That's how it's not designed specifically for you to look up a guide. If you do that, then you are choosing, again, you are choosing to give up part of the game. If you copy paste the talent build, you give up that discovery. You give up the process of like, ooh, what abilities do I want to use? You give that up because you don't like it or because you want to be optimal. And so when you blow through the content, you just have to realize, well, you chose to do it that way, and that's the end result of it, I guess. That's kind of the thing. And I think that like it really becomes a problem too, like when people approach it this way and like say you're running like a low level dungeon or you're like an entry level dungeon or whatever, or LFR, whatever it is, where you're just like, this level of dedication is not necessarily required to complete this content, but you're like, well, I want to get through it quickly and I shouldn't have to carry you through the content. People say that kind of stuff and you're like, it's kind of ironic that you say that when you're out here using all these guides and getting all this prior knowledge, from other people that played the game before you or played the game in beta or whatever, and they have figured everything out. For you to then look up the guide and get all that knowledge, when you do that, you're technically being carried by the people that figured it out for you. And then you go in and you say, I shouldn't have to carry you through this content because you're not looking this all up beforehand. Like, wow, like I feel like that's kind of hypocritical. And you're out here walking around like you're Rembrandt when all you've been doing is coloring inside the lines. Maybe you need to like think about that for a bit, and you'll hear people don't like the argument like, well, be nice to noobs because we were all noobs once. It's like, well, exactly. Like that's kind of how I view it. I mean, if I do a dungeon, and I'm like, man, I've done this 1,000 times. I know how to do this. We could get through this so much faster. But this guy's like, I'm a new tank. And I'm like, okay, then this dungeon is going to take a bit longer. Whatever. It's not a big deal. New tank learning how to play the game. That's fine. I was a new tank once. I had to learn. That's just the way it goes. Like, if I'm tanking and I'm like, I could totally take this wall to wall. Healer, are you good for that? No, man, I'm sorry. I'm a new healer. Okay, we'll take it slow. That's fine. Whatever, I'm playing the game. I actually enjoy playing the game, and for me, I like helping out people. I like new people feeling comfortable like that. I'd rather that than get through it faster. If I got to spend an extra 5 or 10 minutes in the dungeon to help some new guy out, I'm okay with that. That's fine. That's just my approach to the game and my approach to life in general. It's not all about me, and I'm having fun anyways. So like, I don't know, like I guess that's just my approach. And if I wanted to do it differently and I didn't want to deal with new people, I would form my own group. I would look for a guild or something. Hey, you guys want to run some dungeons and just run through them as quickly as possible? That would be my approach. I don't know, going into like LFG and just expecting people to think like that, I just don't get that, man. I don't think that's okay either. I think it's an abuse of the vote the kick tool. And if in a perfect world, if I was running WoW, those people would be banned for a while. They'd sit out. Time to take a break. Now you're really going to be slowed down. But that's just my opinion. I don't know, you guys. I just think that I don't want to tell people how to play the game by any means. I think it's like fine for people to play the game however they want to. But I guess I've just made observations, and I feel like there are times where all this min-maxing stuff can have a negative impact on the game for the people that do it and for the people that don't do it but get pressured to do it or get kicked for not doing it in situations where they don't really need to do it to get through the content that they're trying to do, especially in those situations. So yeah, like, obviously we're not talking about Mythic 15s, and Mythics in general make things different because like in those situations, like I get where you're like, man, we gotta get through this. It's timed, and I don't want to lose my key. Like I get, or whatever. Like you can actually lose something, so that adds a different level of pressure onto the situation, and certainly people who are like world first, like they play the game in a different way than everybody else does. Most people like they just play the game. I'm going to play it, have fun for a while, then I'm going to move on to another game or whatever. That's how a lot of people play the game. That's how people play a lot of games. And people just ain't out here trying to spend 5 hours of homework, research, writing a friggin' paper on how to play the game. Like, people just don't play the game like it's a class or a job, It's just, I don't know. I think there's just like a big disconnect between how people that play just WoW play the game or whatever and how people who just play the game casually or whatever play it. I don't know. It's not even necessarily casually, but yeah, I just wish there was more understanding is all, I guess, is my thing. It's like, I don't want to tell anybody how to play the game. I wish there was more understanding. It's on both sides. Like, it's not just the hardcore optimization focused crowd either. It's like, look, if you go into a dungeon or like you join a pre-made group of people that are very upfront about what their expectations are. They're like, we're more hardcore. You join a hardcore guild or whatever, and you're not hardcore, and then you're complaining or expecting them to cater to how you play the game. I think you may be the casual one, but I think you're the one that's the problem in that situation. Like, you need to be respectful of, of people. If you join their group, you need to be willing to meet their expectations, and if you're not, you shouldn't join the group or the guild or whatever. Like, obviously, that's where it's like it's best when you can find people that are like-minded, so that way you're not having any of those issues. That's the ideal way to play the game, is find a guild or find a group of people to play with that approach the game the way you do or whatever. Or maybe they're in the same situation that you're in, or in general they just view the game the same way you do. If you find that, in the past, that's what I did back in Wrath when I was really into the game a lot more, playing it all the time. I had a group of friends. We all kind of approached the game the same way. We weren't out there like trying to prove anything or whatever. We were just having fun, and I don't even like saying having fun, because for some people doing the highest end content with the min-maxing and all that is fun. Like, I get that, you know what I mean? Like, it's like it's not all or nothing. Like, or either you're having fun or you're min-maxing. It's not always like that, but I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from here. It's one of those things where like I'm trying really hard to be, to be as objective as I can. I guess I have my own perspective on it. Everybody does. It's like you kind of have a bias. If you have a different perspective, I'm open to hear it. I definitely don't think that there's ever a justification to be unnecessarily rude or whatever to somebody, no matter how you approach the game. So that's something I'll never agree with. I definitely don't think that abusing the tools in the game to get rid of somebody because they're not playing exactly the way you want them to, I don't think that's necessary either. I don't think it's good to ridicule people for using less optimal builds. If that's how they want to play the game, you just need to keep your mouth shut and don't worry about how other people play. Just, it's none of your business. So I think that way as well. Likewise, you shouldn't be ridiculing someone that you're a no-life loser because they play the game a lot or they play the game at a more optimal, meta-focused level. I think you're kind of a jerk in that situation. So, like, there's a lot of scenarios here, right? And maybe even a lot of them rarely even happen. So that's something else. Like, what have your experiences been doing dungeons? Are people like this? Are there a lot of issues? Are people rude? Or is it not like this at all, and these issues just get highlighted more than they need to because that's how the internet works? I'd love to hear your guys' opinion on that, whether you play classic or retail. Always, of course, keep it civil, but otherwise I'd love to hear what you guys have to say in the comments below. With that being said, though, you guys, hope you've enjoyed this episode. It's been a topic that I've wanted to talk about for a long time. I could spend a lot more time talking about it, but we'll leave it here for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys on the next one. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, let me know by clicking that like button. And feel free to share it with your friends so they can enjoy it as well. And if you'd like to see more videos, you can subscribe to the channel and click on the bell icon to be notified as soon as new videos are posted. You can also follow me on Facebook, and if you'd like, you can support my work on Patreon. Links to all that stuff can be found in the description below. This is TheKephas. Until next time.